Welcome to another episode of the Dose of Leadership podcast, the show that brings you inspiring and educational interviews with today's most relevant and motivating leaders. Each episode is dedicated to highlight real-life leadership and influence experts who dedicate their lives to the pursuit of the truth, common sense, and courageous leadership. And now, here's your host, Richard Ryerson.
Hey, welcome to the show. Happy, as always, that you're tuning in to Dose of Leadership. So excited that you're tuning in today. Hey, I want to read some phrases to you, see what you think. How do they resonate with you from a leadership perspective? Living tenderly and authentically to be who we are everywhere and create a path that matters. That's the purpose of life. The purpose of a human journey is to live openly and honestly until we become a source of uncovered light. It's not that we are to control or conquer life, but to immerse ourselves in it. And the last one is, fear is a mood to be moved through, not a voice to be obeyed. I love those. What do you think of those? I like them. Comes from a guest. The mind of my next guest, a great guest, Mark Nepo, is on the show. What an amazing conversation. I've been trying to get Mark on the show for quite a while, so this is definitely a bucket list moment for me to get him on the show. He is a poet, a spiritual teacher who has taught in the fields of poetry and spirituality for over 40 years. I've said a long time ago that spirituality, faith, has to be a part of your leadership journey. It's a non-negotiable. When we're talking about leadership, when we're talking about the blanket of love that or the umbrella of love that encompasses this concept of leadership, I don't think you can get there unless you get spiritual, and it can be anything. I don't care what it is. It can be Jesus, it can be Allah, it can be Buddha, it can be a tree. I don't care. But you got to understand that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And Mark Nepo, man, he's been it for me. You know, with over 1 million copies sold, he has moved and inspired readers and seekers all over the world with his #1 New York Times bestseller, The Book of Awakening. Again, he's been called one of the finest spiritual guides of our time. He's a consummate storyteller. He's an eloquent and spiritual teacher. His work is widely accessible, and it's been used by many of his books have been translated into more than 20 languages. He is a best-selling author for sure. He's published 22 books. He's recorded 15 audio projects. His recent work includes The Book of Soul, which came out last year in 2020, about a year ago, Drinking from the River of Light, More Together Than Alone, cited by Spirituality and Practice as one of the best spiritual books of 2018, and Things That Join the Sea and the Sky. He's been given a Lifetime Achievement Award by Age Nation in 2015. In 2016, he was named by Watkins Mind, Body, Spirit as one of the 100 most spiritually influential living people, and is chosen as one of Oprah's own Super Soul 100, a group of inspired leaders using their gifts and voices to elevate humanity. In 2014, this is when I came across him. He was part of Oprah Winfrey's The Life You Want tour and has appeared several times on our Super Soul Sunday program on OWN TV. He's been interviewed by Robin Roberts on Good Morning America. He's a regular columnist for Spirituality and Health magazine. In his 30s, he was diagnosed with a rare form of lymphoma, a struggle which helped to form this philosophy of experiencing life fully while staying in relationship to an unknowable future. He devotes his writing, his teaching to the journey of this inner transformation in this life of relationship. I absolutely love him, and it was such an honor to have him on this show. We didn't get him. I was wanting to start this conversation talking about his book, but we just had this great, authentic, organic conversation, chock full of value-packed information that I believe will help you in your leadership journey. I highly encourage you to check out all of his websites at marknepo.com. That's Mark and spelled Nepo.com. His other website, 3intentions.com, and then wmspeakers.com. And you can check on Mark Nepo. He's got a webinar coming up in the summer, June 13th, 20th, 27th, and it's called The Life of Expression, Finding Your Inner Voice. I'll have links to that on the show notes, but it's all about spending time together, getting in touch into the miraculous depth of being that is always just below whatever we carry. If that sounds a little too heavy for you, I got to tell you, Mark Nepo is the best. He's been a huge part of my spiritual journey, my leadership journey, and you can learn more about his webinar at live.marknepo.com. Such an amazing guest, such an amazing conversation. So thrilled to have him on. The show is brought to you by my sponsor, Equity Bank. Well over 2 years now, well over 50 episodes. They've been a huge part of Dose of Leadership. They're a team that knows what it takes to start and grow a business. It's been so fun and exciting to watch them grow into one of the fastest growing banks in the Midwest. Equity Bank is now listed on the NASDAQ exchange. They got locations all across Kansas, as well as Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, with plans to expand even further. Clearly, this team at Equity Bank knows how to lead for growth, so it feels like your current bank is more of a follower than a leader, and you want to work with a bank that really understands your needs. Go check them out. Go to equitybank.com. Also encourage you to go to doseofleadership.com, learn more about my Dose of Leadership University, which I opened my doors back in February, looking for 50 new members to join. So if you're looking for a group, a community of like-minded leaders where we push each other out of our comfort zone into the growth zone, it's a group of accountability, solving real-life leadership challenges and problems. Go check it out. Check out the testimonials. Check out the short little video that I put on talking about the university. But you can look at the testimony videos of my mentors, my 15 or so mentors that are helping me grow the university, that will be there to help you along with me on your leadership journey. Go to doseofleadership.com/university to learn more. All right, let's dive into this conversation, this amazing conversation with the one and only Mark Nepo here on Dose of Leadership. Well, Mark Nepo on Dose of Leadership. What a thrill. Welcome to the show, sir.
Oh, well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
Been a fan of you for a really long time. I want to thank you right from the very get-go. You were one of the, when I really dove into your work, 10 years ago, you were the one that kind of got me going down the path of, I always saw myself as driven. And you kind of woke me up to being drawn to things, because I heard you talking about that. I think it was on Oprah a long time ago. And that really resonated with me. And my life has gotten, I still fall into that trap of being driven, right? It's a daily journey. But I do see myself, I try to slow down and try to get drawn to things. So I just wanted to thank you for that, because it was because of you that my path has taken a different
route.
You're
very welcome. And maybe it's helpful to start there, just to, share a little bit about what that's about for folks. That, I just turned 70, which just seems hard to believe. When I saw people my age when I was younger, I thought they were ancient. It doesn't seem so old now.
Right, for sure.
But, back, as you know from my work, in my mid-30s, early 30s, I almost died from a rare form of lymphoma. And before that, I was, as you were mentioning, I was a very driven young artist. And when I woke on the other side of this journey that turned me inside out and upside down, I was, of course, so grateful to still be alive, but my drive was gone. And it was very disorienting. It wasn't like all of a sudden I realized, oh no, I'm drawn rather than being driven. I was confused. I thought, my God, I'm here, but did I lose my gift? And where is it? And what do I do? But over months, I started to realize, as you shared, that I was now drawn to things, not driven. And it's actually been more liberating and more joyous. And the image that has come to me, having experienced that transformation, it's like you take a river like the Mississippi, or a strong river, and boy, it's a strong river because of its narrow bank. Even if they're wide, they're still banks. It roars, it makes noise, but when it reaches the sea, when it reaches the Gulf of Mexico down there, all that noise disappears, because the current doesn't disappear. The current goes deeper and joins the rest of the ocean. And that's what had happened to me. And I didn't recognize my gift without the noise.
Right. So it becomes deeper. It becomes wider and deeper, but at some sense, it's calmer, right? If the way you're looking at it.
Calmer. In the Sufi tradition, the Sufi poet Ghalib said, "Joy for the raindrop is entering the lake." Joy for the raindrop is entering the lake. And, when we think of that, the raindrop doesn't lose itself by joining the lake. It just loses its hard defined boundaries.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you talk about in your new book, when we're talking about it's not, and I think that's where I think when I was being driven, where I always had this gnawing, and I still have it. It's like this gnawing. I call it a gnawing for significance, I think. And I think that can be a good thing and a bad thing. And I think the bad thing, it can lead you down, it can cover up, you see things as challenges or problems, and you're just really reacting to anxiety, and you're working only so hard till the anxiety goes away, and you're just kind of reacting to life. Whereas if you kind of harness the anxiety, which is, and start looking at it, it's not about, as you write in your book, not to conquer or control life, but it's to immerse yourselves in it, right? And that's the meaning to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, and again, as we share, we're all just guessing at what this mystery is all about, like living and comparing notes. So, what I offer are examples, not instructions. It's just what I've been able to gather from my time here on Earth. And I think one of the things that I've realized about that gnawing for significance is we're trained at an early age to seek worth and approval externally.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned from the deepest experiences that worth only comes from internally. I want to have relationships, and I want them, so when I am, and this gets to a thing in our culture, the modern culture, and it's always happened, but more so in our modern culture, we're taught at a certain point, whatever field you're drawn to, if you want to get ahead, you got to get attention.
Mm-hmm.
But I've learned if you want to get a heart, you have to give attention. And early on, it was giving attention that, recognizing and verifying life around me that made me feel alive, that caused me to grow, that caused me to stay in wonder. And so it's very interesting that, yes, in the outer world, we do have to, quote, get attention at some point to be able to do things and have jobs and have resumes. But that's not where the worth comes from. So we're split. We're split where you look at like reality TV culture. Everyone is desperate to be a celebrity when we're all quietly aching for something to celebrate.
That's right. Yeah. It feeds into the big lie that I think most of us are on, that rat race, that our identity, as you're pointing out, is defined by what we accomplish and what other people think about us. And that's the trap, right? And if we chase that, we'll never satisfy it.
Yeah. And I think that one of the great rewards for our creativity and our energy is that we are shaped by that involvement. Even when I'm trying to create something, it's creating me. The John Ruskin, who was a 18th century English watercolorist and critic, had this beautiful saying. He said, the reward for a person's work, their toil, is not what they get for it, but what they become.
Right.
By giving themselves to it.
By surrender, but by doing the work, right? It's kind of like I kind of remember. Remember hearing you say. I just thought about this, that you kind of had this gnawing or this kind of ambition to be a great poet when you were younger, and then as you've gotten older, and what we're talking about here is like you wanted to be the poem, right?
Yes.
And so, right?
Yeah. When I was younger, I thought, like all of it, I thought, even in a really good way, if I could work hard enough and long enough, maybe I would write one or two great poems, and then cancer came along and knocked me upside down. Forget writing great poems. I needed to discover true poems to help me live. And yes, now at this point in my life, I want to be the poem. You know, we all know this when we're involved in things. There's a different, you know, we all, whether you're working on a car or in a garden or whatever you might be doing, when you're really in it, all of a sudden you look up and you go, where'd that time go? Like
Right.
2 hours. It seemed like a second.
Right.
And that's because by giving ourselves over completely, we enter time.
Right.
We stop moving through time. So in a lot of ways, like, it's interesting, my understanding of discipline is totally different than when I was young. You know, when I was young, especially as a writer or an artist, you're taught, and you know, we recognize this, that discipline is staying focused, not being distracted, persevering, and seeing through till you accomplish what you set out to do. Well, you know, after writing enough books, I realized, you know, I'm going to write them. So that's not the point isn't just to turn them out.
Mm-hmm.
It's where I'm brought and how I'm brought alive by entering them. And so now, you know, like my wife's a potter. She's out in her studio now. And so, for example, you know, at the end of the day, we'll meet for dinner. And so I'm in my study where we are now. I am now. And when I'm working, I'm entering time. I'm in relationship. I'm in conversation. I'm being challenged. I'm growing. But then around, let's say 4:30 or 4 o'clock, all of a sudden I'm aware that we're going to meet around 5. And all of a sudden, even after all these years, my mind goes, well, gee, if I push a little bit, maybe I'll finish these next 3 pages. And now discipline is I can't eliminate that thought because I'm human. But now discipline is as soon as I'm aware of it, I drop it and walk away because I'm not coming from my heart anymore.
Right. And that's the key, is the awareness part, right? The self-awareness piece, I think, is 80% of the battle of all of this. And I don't even like the word transformation. I like the word renovation better, because I don't really transform my house. I renovate it, right? Transforming seems a little overwhelming to me. That's just me. But the awareness in all of this, right? Like even when we're talking about limiting beliefs or negative talk, of all the stuff that we all deal with, when you start becoming aware of it, you turning up the volume, it can be a little daunting, right? Because you don't realize how noisy it is. But that awareness, I think, is 80% of the battle. And sometimes not knowing what to do next is okay, but just being aware and like, okay, I'm going to, like you said, putting your pencil down, I need to walk away. That's huge.
Well, I think it is huge, and I think that this is really the work of self-awareness. I believe, you know, probably from my writing, but you know, I don't believe in any kind of arrived state of enlightenment.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe somebody is that way, but that's not been my experience.
No.
I'm clear, and then I'm confused, and I'm agile, and then I'm spilling the garbage, you know, and
Right.
And so I feel like we're all part of being human. Is we each have to personalize a practice of return.
Mm-hmm.
How do we come back to what matters? That to me is the work of self-awareness, is what's in our toolbox to bring us back when we fall off. You know, in the medieval times, medieval monks, when asked how they practiced their faith, said by falling down and getting up. And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
Well, I think you're getting to the point that I love about, or was kind of the clarity and alignment that I got from your work, is that it's that what you're talking about there is part of that rhythm that we need to embrace. And it's that rhythm that kind of gives you the magic of life. And I think too often we think it needs to be separate. Like we need to be separate from, like you can't have suffering without the great times, right? You can't have beauty without ugliness. And you have to accept that and be immersed in all of that. Because, right? Am I saying that right? Yes.
The whole of life, the miracle and resilience and the resources of life come in their totality. Mm-hmm. And people from the beginning of time have always wanted, there's anonymous Assyrian text from 7,000 years ago, that verses that say, I only want the good stuff. You can keep the bad stuff. So we've been, that's part of being human, of course, but that's not the way life works. It's almost like spiritual physics. It all comes to me, I understand it, as a whole. So, like I have this glass of water. So the water, we all learn at an early age, is H2O. But I can't say to you, well, I'll just take the hydrogen, please.
Right.
Because even if you could separate it for me, it would no longer be water and no longer be life-giving or quenching. And so the challenge in being human is that for it to be quenching and life-giving, we got to take it all in, and we need each other to sort out the difficult from the wondrous. I think life has been made just difficult enough that we need each other, and that ensures the journey of love. And this sense that we're never done. When I was a boy, my father, who's now gone, but he was a master woodworker, and he loved the sea, and he was in the Navy in World War II, but he built a 30-foot wooden catch when I was a boy, and we spent a lot of time my brother and I as kids out on the Great South Bay off of Long Island. And but when I was a boy, like 8 or 9, and we had like fog or bad weather, he'd put me at the tiller, and because he must have sensed that I had good attention, because he would give me the compass and say, all right, I want you to head here. And I learned way back then that even when I was on course, and I'm sure you know this if you've done that, right? Mm-hmm. It's never still. No, the compass never. Even when you're on course. So even when you're on course in life, you're always going, oh, wait, a little to the left, oh, a little to the right, oh, and that's being on course. Mm-hmm. And that's really helpful as a person, as a human being. Even when I'm on course, I got to keep course correcting.
Yeah. A bunch of minor jobs. I've been a pilot for 30 years.
Wow.
And that's one thing, like when you fly straight and level, everybody thinks, it's like you're flying with your fingertips, and it's a bunch of micro corrections constantly, right? It's like if you could see what my hands and fingertips are doing for this steady course, it's like, you know what I mean? It's just, and even when and particularly when you're coming in for landing on a precision, you'd be surprised how much the yoke is moving, but all you sense and see is this, right? But there's a lot of this, and even with your feet. So I like that analogy. Yeah.
And right, I mean, you have to love that process, because it's never done.
Yeah. One thing when we talk about fear and uncertainty, I talk about that a lot in this show, and that's kind of organically come up over the 8 years of doing this show and with my coaching. And from my observation, that it seems like when you look at all these self-help books, the process, the things we're trying to do, it's always dealing with fear and uncertainty. And I've come to accept that the fear and uncertainty never goes away. I got a lot of that from my time in the Marine Corps, at least the mindset of being an officer in the Marine Corps. It's like, look, the fear and uncertainty is never going to go away. So let's spend our limited time and resources on being the composed force within this kind of chaotic situation. That is much more profitable than trying to eliminate any dragons that may rear their ugly heads. We just know there's going to be dragons. I wouldn't want dragons, and I'll do things to maybe prevent them, but I'm going to expect them. And that, to me, what I just said there kind of sums up a lot of what I've learned from your work. How does that resonate with you when you hear me say that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about fear and pain, and I think that then, and all the traditions offer us tools with this. Let me share a little story that's an ancient Hindu story about fear and pain, which is really helpful in this, because I do agree we're never going to eliminate fear or pain, and what tools are in our toolbox personally so that we can meet them and stay larger than them. So there's this story, there's a master and an apprentice. There's always a master and an apprentice.
All right.
And the master, the truth be known, really finds the apprentice annoying, because he's always complaining. Everything is a complaint. So the master says to the apprentice, get a handful of salt, put it in a glass of water, and bring it to me quietly. So the apprentice brings it. Master says, drink from the glass. And the apprentice drinks and he spits it out. And the master says, "What's the matter?" He says, "It's bitter." Master says, "I want you to get the same exact handful of salt and follow me quietly." So the apprentice cups the same amount of salt in his hand. He follows the master, who leads him to a lake. The master says, "Put the salt in the lake." He does, and the master says, "Drink." So he kneels down, he scoops up the water, it dribbles down his chin, and the master says, "Well?" And he says, "Oh, it's fresh." And the master looks at the apprentice. He says, "Stop being a glass, become a lake."
That's great.
Stop being a glass, become a lake. And that's an ancient, anonymous Hindu teaching story. When I was teaching once several years ago, this wonderful, it was actually at a medical school, and this resident who was Hindu, she came up and told me, "My grandmother told me that story," which just made my heart leap. But one of the things that I take from that that's so helpful is everybody gets their handful of salt. That's like the fear and the pain. Some of us get it all at once. Some of us get it a grain at a time or clumps. Everybody gets it. You're never going to eliminate. You can hear that story and say, "Well, yeah, it makes sense. I'm not going to be a glass." Oh, yes, we will, because we're human. Right. But that's the course correction. That's the work of self. That's the return. Is like when I am a glass, the only way I can't eliminate pain or fear, but I can right size it by enlarging my sense of things.
The perspective.
By becoming a lake. So the question is for everyone, what do you do when you're a glass to become a lake? What's in your toolbox? Do you talk to a loved one? Do you take a walk in nature? Do you read a favorite passage? Do you, do you go out and garden? What do you do? Do you listen in silence? Do you meditate? What are the tools in your toolbox? Because when we're tight and when we're like a glass, that's when we need to know what's in our toolbox, to enlarge our sense of things. Again, not to eliminate pain or fear, but to right size it.
Yeah, you're right that fear is a mood that we need to be moved through, not a voice to be obeyed. And I love that, right? It's like we got to meet it head on, and whatever your toolbox is, right, become that lake, broaden the perspective, understand, try to get a sense of what we're really dealing with here in an authentic, real way, but use it as a barometer to move through, because something significant is going to happen on the other side of it, right? That's the beauty of it.
Well, yeah. So yes, absolutely. And I think that, part of and this is a deep, paradox or truism that's spoken about in all traditions, but what's in the way is the way.
Yeah.
What's in the way is the way. We understandably say, "Oh, if I didn't have to deal with this, well, then I'd be happy." Or if I could only get through this, or "God damn, this is in my way." Well, what's in the way is the way. And so, the fear I've learned, because I've, from all I've been through, I experienced a lot of fear. And I have found fear gets its power from not looking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you look, so there's two things about that, and fear gets its power from going into the future or the past. The present, no matter how painful, is known. And then, when we're in pain, we just want it to pass, but it's known at least. And this is, one of the most difficult things, I know when we have loved one, being the patient or the one suffering versus the partner who's nearby. If I'm the patient or the person suffering, my pain is known and I just want to get through it. But for the loved one, because you love someone, it's always worse.
Right.
You hold it and imagine it, and it's a different kind of pain.
That's interesting. That's true. Mm-hmm.
It's a different kind of pain. But so in finding that, let's take the two things about the looking at fear. The first is you take the old proverbial thing about, as a child, if you don't look in a closet, and so there's a boogeyman in there, and the longer you don't look, the bigger it gets. And then you have a kind uncle or grandparent takes you by the hand, says, let's look in that closet, and they open the door, and okay, there's no boogeyman. And we all know when you first open that closet, it looks dark, and then it starts to get a little lighter. Well, the air in that closet hasn't changed. Our eyes have gotten accustomed to the dark.
Right.
And that's one of the quiet courages every person is, I think, asked to develop, is the courage of outweighting our alarm, letting our eyes grow accustomed to the fear and the pain so it's right size. Now, another great lesson about this, and this is from martial arts. I don't know martial arts, I don't practice, I just read about and saw this metaphor that apparently in Aikido, which is one of the martial arts which is known for not resisting energy but using energy of an aggressor to go with you or by you. So in this one thing, there's a master who, not physically but psychologically, he's telling his students that when threat comes, adrenaline makes it everywhere.
Right.
It's everywhere. There's a cloud of fear. His instruction to his students is, before you act, you must outweigh the cloud of fear. And so he uses an example of someone's coming at you with a knife. Well, in the moment of adrenaline, everything is not safe.
Right.
But if you can right size, and physically, I don't know how anybody does this physically. I'm just taking the metaphor emotionally. It blows my mind to think about how anybody does this physically. Right. But emotionally, if you outweigh that cloud of fear, then there's only one point that's a threat, and that's the point of the knife. Every other point is safe. Now, the master says, you have real choices.
Yeah.
And that's so helpful in terms of problems and fears and difficulties and situations in life. They first happen, your adrenaline goes, and you go, oh my God. But then if you can say, okay, this is the one point that's trouble, everything else is free to move in, now you have real choices.
Hey, we're about halfway through the conversation, but I wanted to take the time to talk about my good friends, the sponsor here of this special series at Equity Bank. Have you ever noticed that most business bankers seem to really understand just one thing? It's banking, right? And not a lot about business. It makes sense since most banks were built generations ago and now they're often run by caretakers, not business builders. Well, it's not the case here at Equity Bank. The bankers at Equity Bank didn't inherit a bank generations ago. They built one of their own. They know that building something takes expertise, vision, and hard work. And over the past decade, they've built one of the region's fastest growing banks by working side by side with customers, with entrepreneurs, with leaders in communities, all throughout Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Recently, Equity Bank was listed on the NASDAQ exchange, which gives them even greater capabilities to take on those big deals that growing businesses need to keep on growing. So if you're tired of talking to bankers who've never really ran or owned or built a business, then I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised when you talk to my friends at Equity Bank. Thanks for listening to this show. Let's get back to the conversation, this unique and special series on leadership and entrepreneurship brought to you by my friends at Equity Bank.
And that's the key. I love that. I love that story, that analogy, because it's getting, if we can get to that point to where we're always at a choice point. I'm fascinated by that, when you can get to the point where you can choose, because that's everything. That's the power, as opposed to where you're just reacting to anxiety. The other is the anxiety is probably still there. The feelings, the physical manifestations of fear are still there, but now you're at a choice point, and now that's everything. That's where the power comes from. It's just the truth.
There are, and then there's two kinds of choices. There's the choice of trying to impose our will, and there's the choice of of aligning with the forces of life.
Yeah.
Which is, to me, more of the proper use of will. And, it's just interesting when I did my book on community, More Together Than Alone, and I came across this real kind of kind of paradox in the American character. Where, I travel, before COVID, I traveled a lot.
Yeah, right.
But I was on my way. I was going to teach in Canada, and it was a long line. It took a long time, and I was just, I wasn't on my phone or everything. And I started reading my passport. I never really looked at it.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of each page, which I never realized, is a quote from a president.
Right. That's right.
I never realized that. And I just chanced to read. So on page 19 was a quote from Lyndon Johnson, and page 20 was Eisenhower. And Johnson said something like, this is America. If the world doesn't meet what we want, we will bend it to our need.
Wow.
Yeah, and I thought, whoa, that's kind of arrogant, right?
Yeah.
And manipulating. And then the next page is Eisenhower, who experienced World War II, who was one of the commanders to liberate the concentration camps, who actually, in liberating Auschwitz, went to the nearby village and brought the townspeople to see the survivors.
Yeah.
Say, no, you don't look away. And he said, America, whatever we want to bring to the world, we must pass through our heart first.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And and then I started to realize, ever since the brilliance of America was conceived by human founding fathers who all owned slaves, we have struggled with this tension between bending the world and loving the world.
Yeah.
And we struggle with that as human beings. We try to bend things and then they break.
I think there's such a hunger for this compassionate side of leadership. I really started talking about this the last couple of years. There was these 4 C's that I talked about. I'm less concerned about charisma. I'm more concerned about being composed, confident, consistent, and courageous, is what I said. But the 5th one, I added compassion in there. And I think that's what people are so hungry for. And to unlock that compassion, you need authenticity, transparency, and vulnerability, which in what you write, truth, meaning, and kindness, I would lump that in that compassion thing too, right? And to get to truth, meaning, and kindness, you got to be authentic, you got to be transparent, you got to be vulnerable. But I'm with you. It just seems like everywhere I look, people are starving for that. But yet we still, as you said, remarkable tension. We seem in some aspects more divided than ever, more tense than ever. And I would like to think that we're moving towards what you're talking about, truth, meaning, and kindness, as opposed to the opposite. But sometimes it just seems like it's getting worse, though.
I think all of that's true. I think all of it's true, and I think this raises, and I want to tell a little parable here, but first, talk about what I feel is so important. This is the difference between progress and incarnation. Mm-hmm. So progress is where we do start out in a better place because of the efforts of the last generation. Yeah. And we grow. And so let's take an example of an indigenous tribe that moves to an uninhabited part of the wilderness. They climb up on a mountain and they say, this is a place where we want to build a village because, if we clear these trees, you'll be able to see all of creation, and that's where we want to live. And so they spend 10 years clearing all the trees, and then the children who are born there, they don't have to clear the trees.
Right.
They wake up and see it. That's progress. Incarnation is, no matter how advanced or how primitive a generation, there are passages that every human being, it's our turn to go through. Birth, death, betrayal, trust, love, loss, friendship, suffering, all the things we're talking about. And in that, there's no shortcut. Everybody, so where we are as a society, which is very strident, and yet at the same time very promising, every generation has and will face their version of this. And it's
Right.
our turn to see how far we can bring it. And so that leads me to this. Well, first is a metaphor and then a parable. The metaphor is, and why it's so important for us to be doing the work like you're doing, and having this conversation and keeping it all alive and talking about compassion and love, because if we all know that in a one human body, I'm healthy as long as I have one more healthy cell than toxic. I want a lot more.
Right.
As long as I have one. Well, if humanity is a global body, every soul is a cell in that body.
Mm-hmm.
Things like we're doing here, we have to keep so that there's at least one more healthy soul than toxic, so that life continues. And so, one of the, like, you look in the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages in Europe, I was astonished to learn only 10% of the European population was literate.
Wow.
90% was illiterate. So 10% kept literacy alive for 300 years.
Wow.
And so now our job is to keep the literacy of the heart alive.
Yeah. Yeah, at the end of the day, it is all about love for me, right? And I think I talk about that a lot. And, and I think a lot of times I've had people recoil when I've told groups of people that this is about love, and they recoil because I think they go to the eros side of love, and I'm talking about the agape style of love, where it's an action and where I sacrifice so that you may prosper type of love, right?
Yeah.
Everything, to me, that's everything. If you don't have it, and the interconnectedness, I think that's something I've certainly have become more aware of over particularly last 5 years, and having these conversations is that. And you spoke earlier about the arriving piece. I think early on in my leadership, I think we all do, right? When we're like, if I could just get this, if I could just get the corner off, if I could just plant the flag and say, all right. And I run away from that like the plague, because if you're doing that, the next thing that happens is a fall, which has happened to me, right? And if you think that you've arrived. So, but my point is like, it's like, changing a flat tire as you're driving down the highway, or building an airplane while you're flying at the same time. That's that paradox that you have to do it. Like you have to, as an individual, think, well, I could never be this type of person. I don't see myself as a leader. I don't see myself as spiritual. Let me get that right. Then I'll go do this. No, you have to go do this at the same time while you're doing it. And what I've come to realize that if I shine the light on me and you see that authentically, then I can't get you to shift, but you can maybe bathe in my light. And if you can authentically and vulnerably see me, or you can see me in an authentic, vulnerable way trying to do all this, then maybe you'll do the same, right? That's the best I can do, right?
Well, I think that, not through persuasion or control or debate, but, we all know, look at the sun. The sun is a great teacher. Mm-hmm. The sun emanates light and warmth in all directions without preference. It doesn't say, well, I think today I'll just shine on the roses. No. Right. And so the sun is a great teacher for us, because the heart is an inner sun. Yeah. And when we can be authentic in the way we're talking, what happens if the sun, everything grows to it? And if we can be authentic, then we naturally grow to each other. Yeah. I become my best self if I grow to your best self. So here's this parable about compassion. There's two monks, and they're studying long and hard, because one day they're going to climb a mountain and meet with Buddha at the top of the mountain. So they study for years. The day comes. They start up the mountain. About halfway, one of them breaks his leg. So they spend the night. His fellow monk takes care of him. And in the morning, he's getting ready to leave him comfortably and keep his appointment with Buddha. But he's not doing well. His friend's not doing well. He's got a fever. It's clear that he can't just leave him. And the parable stops there, and the question is asked, of course, what would you do? And what the parable opens is, when you have an age where more people will keep their appointment at the top of the mountain than care for their broken other, you have an age that will engender cruelty. When you have an age where more people will discover that caring for their broken other is the summit, you have an age that engenders compassion. And every day, just as we face the choice between bending and loving, we face this choice. And it doesn't matter what's on top of that mountain. It could be God, security, family, wealth, you name it. When you feel determined to keep that appointment over helping who you meet along the way, you are even very subtly engendering, cruelty. And so one of the great lessons in my life has been, there's nothing wrong with working for what you want, but very often, more often than not, working for what I want has been an apprenticeship for working with what I'm given. And that has released my deepest gifts.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of ties into what I kind of remember you saying too, that we got to get comfortable with asking for what we need, but getting comfortable with what we're given. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, so we're challenged to have the courage to ask for what we need, only to practice accepting what we're given.
Yeah.
Which is a paradox. And the paradox is that, often we don't get what we want when we ask for it, but that's not the point. The courage, when I have the courage to ask for what I need, I become more intimate with my own nature.
Right.
And when I practice accepting what I'm given, I become more intimate with the nature of the universe.
Which is right, yeah, which drives to the whole kind of the power and the beauty of the rhythm that we're talking about, right? Because that's the discovery, as opposed to if I just focus on what I didn't get. Well, first, like you said, having the courage, again, that's that. Because, it's easy to, as human beings, it's so easy to say what I don't want. It takes a tremendous amount of work to say what I do want.
Yeah.
It takes courage and a lot of brain power to figure out what I want. It's hard.
Yeah.
You think it wouldn't be, but it really is. It's easy to go, I don't like that. That hurts. This is gross. But what do I really want? Yeah. So having the courage to ask for that, because you can easily think you're dreaming big, but then you talk yourself down out of it, right? And you're releasing some of that tension, and that tension is what you're talking about there. And this is what I want. There's tension. I don't know how I'm going to get it. I didn't get what I wanted, but now through that discovery, right, you start to see, as you said, that's where you start to.
Well, often, often, there's a couple of things here that what you're sharing is raising, and one's another little story. But let me first say that, Mother Teresa talked about that courage is doing small things with love.
Yeah.
And when we find ourselves in this place, that it is a step at a time. And there's a story, I'll just modernize it, but it's a story about a man who wants to be a good-natured, wants to be a philanthropist. Well, he doesn't have any money, so he wants to go work for a foundation. He wants to do good work. Yeah. And he gets an interview, and on the way to the interview, at a light, this old woman falls in the street with her groceries, and he stops and he helps her up, and it's not that simple. She's bruised. He takes her to urgent care. He misses his interview. He reschedules it. Next time, he's parked. He's walking near the building, and this little kid's chasing a loose dog that's running out in traffic. He's off helping them catch the dog, and he misses his appointment the second time. Well, the foundation thinks, this is a slacker, forget him. Right. And all the while he's saying, I want to be someone who does good. And his want to do good, to be someone who does good, is constantly interrupted by a path of doing good deeds.
Right.
He's already someone who's doing good.
Right. He didn't even realize. Yeah, because he was. Yeah.
So that leads, if I'd love to share this is a new poem that just written the other day that is really about all this. It's called Praying I Will Find. I used to have so many plans, good plans, grand plans. In the beginning, I would be annoyed by the calamities I'd meet along the way that would keep me from my plans. I used to pride myself on how I could get back on track so quickly. But the more I loved and the more I suffered, the more my plans were interrupted by those in need. Eventually, the call of life, unexpected and unrehearsed, made Swiss cheese of my plans. Now, like an emperor undressed by time, I wander the days naked of plans, praying that I will find love to give and suffering to heal before the sun goes down.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
That's so true. I think that's where I struggle. When we started this conversation, I said, I always saw myself as driven, having that gnawing. But it goes back to being present, right, and seeing what's around you and seeing where you're needed. And I think it's okay. I think a lot of times when we go down this path of discovery of the power of love and the interconnectedness, and I think sometimes on the surface people look at it as a sign of weakness or a sign of passivity, and it's not. I mean, to me, it's living a life of intensity of will, but with the humble, teachable spirit. And where that Venn diagram intersects, that's the sweet spot, right? And so we're not talking about passivity here. We're talking about bold, courageous actions. And that's personal for you, right? Whatever bold and courageous looks different for everybody. But whatever that is, and getting out of that comfort zone into the growth zone, but having that humble, teachable spirit is the other part of it. And that's what I got from that poem, because having a humble, teachable spirit will open me up to the present, right? What's happening here, right?
And the present where we can, it's interesting. Our gifts are like, and I use this metaphor in one of my books, that it's like a wooden match. The tip of that, we all know the flame is dormant in the phosphorus tip,
right?
But it doesn't release warmth or light until you strike it against a surface. Mm-hmm. And that's like our gifts. Our gifts don't release their warmth or light until we strike them against the needs of the world. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't matter whether you're seen or not. It's great if you're seen. One of the things about is this gnawing sense of significance we're all kind of taught to aspire to. Again, it's like that worth, waiting for it to be recognized from the outside rather than knowing it from experience of loving and giving. So there's a great, look at in the West, like we go by a tree, even, this is teenagers, right? And what do? We carve our names in the tree.
Right.
And in the Native American tradition, they're taught, no, you leave the tree and the forest. You honor it by leaving it as if you were never there.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it speaks to the power and the insidious side of the ego side of us, right? And trying to get past the ego. And again, the lie that I think culture and society kind of ingrains in us from an early age, that, it's either the Lyndon Johnson view of the world or the Eisenhower view of the world, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the great, you look at this, so telling, right? You probably, when you were a kid, King of the Hill,
mm-hmm.
that old game. Mm-hmm. And, somehow as a kid, I'm sure you were, we all were, I didn't even know what it was, but I saw a bunch of kids playing on the hill. It became obvious. Oh, well, the goal is to get on top of the hill. Okay, I'll play. Next thing I know, I'm fighting against others to get on top of the hill. And then, one day, quite by accident, I got on top of the hill, and all of a sudden, it was the worst place in the world. Everybody was after me, and I was alone.
All by myself.
And what a metaphor for a misguided, seeking for significance. Because the truth is, most of the time, there's enough room for more than one person up there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of room up there.
Well, and to your point, you can't do it alone. I mean, that's the thing that's the truth is like, and that's the beauty of it by doing it with others is like where, because you're on a different path, I'm a different path. I learn from you, you learn from me.
Absolutely.
I help when you're weak, I'm strong, I'm helping you and vice versa. It seems like common sense, but I don't know why I don't know. I guess it's been a tough year just seeing how divisive we are, but at the same time, I'm optimistic because I do see, and maybe it's just because I do this all the time and having 500 conversations with people like you, it fuels my emotional fuel tank and gives me passion to take baby steps towards, like you said.
Well, I think it helps being immersed in what matters for all of us, wherever we find it. And this is a word that has a beautiful original meaning, and it's the word honor.
Yeah.
The word honor, literally, the origin of it means to keep what is true in view.
Right.
That's a fantastic definition, and that is a fantastic practice, both, even in terms like with that gnawing significance. When we can keep what we know to be true about ourselves in view, we're honoring our own spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't got to seek elsewhere. And when I know, just like you're saying, if I'm not clear and I'm having a bad time, well, you honor our friendship by keeping what you know about me in view until I can see it again.
Yeah.
And we keep and so there's a whole, part of us that are keeping what we know to be true about this experiment we call democracy as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a question for listeners to personalize that is, what can you name one thing you know to be true, and how are you honoring it? How are you keeping it in view? What's your practice?
What is your practice? Well, I think, in getting people to, and I don't know why it took me so long to shift to this view late in life, well into my 40s, where I was, and I considered myself open-minded, but I would still say I was seeking to prove what's right. It was always about proving and lawyering up to present you the facts, to influence, to persuade that I was right. And now it's more of a seeking to understand, right? The power is in the seeking to understand.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And we're never, we certainly understand that feeling of why did it take so long, but we're never late.
That's true.
We're always just on time. And because what's in the way is the way. And if it had happened sooner, it wouldn't be so deep in you.
Yeah. No, I like that. When you said one thing, I just remembered when you said the way is the way. It's kind of that's the Stoic philosophy, right? The obstacle is the way. But I think it's important too not to deify the obstacle either, right? I mean,
sure.
Don't.
Well, I think the truth is that every person will be given the opportunity to be dropped into the depth of life. Mm-hmm. It could be by something difficult. It could be by something beautiful. It could be by wonder or being loved completely for the first time. Yeah. Or, who knows? It could be 1,000 different things. It's not just the difficult things.
Wow, I'm looking at this clock. I could talk to you for 3 hours about this stuff. I'm going to be respectful for your time. You're such a fun conversation for me, a meaningful conversation, a sacred conversation for me. I just want you to know that. But I mean, we didn't even talk about, your work is broad and deep, and I encourage anyone to go out there and get it. The Book of Soul, which came out about almost a year ago, May last year, right in the middle of the pandemic. Great book. I love it. I read a chapter a week. and which is how it was designed, written that way, right?
Oh,
To kind of
wonderful.
digest
Thank
it
you. Yeah.
one chapter a week. There's some great stuff in there. We hit on some of these points in there. I encourage everyone to get it. But you have a webinar coming up too in the summer,
Yes.
right? So tell me
Yeah,
about that.
thank you. So during this time I've started doing webinars. So in June, on 3 successive Sundays, June 13, 20, and 27, there'll be each is one part of a 3-part webinar, and it's focused on the life of expression, finding our voice. And it's not just about writing. It's about the kinds of things we're talking about. How do we find our own authentic center of worth and be who we are in the world? And so folks can register for that at live.marknepo.com. And yeah, it's been an amazing thing to start to do some of these webinars, had to learn like everyone else how to teach online. And I've been amazed at, just like our conversation, there's a lot of wonderful, meaningful connection that can happen. It wouldn't replace being in person together, but it's quite remarkable.
Yeah. No, I've had to do a lot of online trainings too. I've done a handful of online keynotes, which has been interesting, and have had to record too and send. But yeah, no, that sounds amazing. So what was the website again? I'll have links to this on my show notes. But
live.marknepo.com.
Got it. Live.marknepo.com. Perfect. I'll have links to that. Mark, you're the best. I love your work. It's been a thrill to have you on this show. I hope to do it again sometimes. Hope we can stay in touch and have you back. There's so much more to explore with you. You're great.
Well,
thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. And just keep in touch with Eileen, and I'd be happy to keep our conversation going at another time.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Hey, thanks so much for tuning into the show. I hope you got some value out of this episode. If you did, please do me a huge favor. Tell somebody about this show. Tell your spouse, tell your kids, tell your coworkers. Let them know about the value that Dose of Leadership brings to your world. Go to doseofleadership.com. You can learn more about my services. If you're looking for somebody to speak, teach, or coach about leadership, I'm your guy. I'm known for my ability to transform individuals and organizations, teaching them the concepts of creating a culture of decentralized leadership. I do think that is the secret sauce to facing all the challenges that we face today. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I look forward to the next time we work together, and until the meantime, make it a great one.